It's not a solo adventure as in I did it alone. It's as in I did that final piece alone. That final 10% push, yeah, that was me, but I mean 90% of it's the people around you and the support and the love and the bonding. And so that's what you hold on to.
Hello, intrepid listeners, and welcome to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. I'm your host, Dale Simonson, and you just heard from our guest today who has a really cool sailing adventure to share and words of wisdom well beyond what you might expect of an 18-year-old. What I like about today's story is the general applicability for any aspiring sailor or adventurer, but I especially like the message for you young listeners out there and for your parents. Enjoy the show, and remember to check out our associated website at www.gocarpediemnow.com for more ideas and inspiration. Let's go live your dream adventure. My guest today is Cal Courier, a young sailor and adventurer, really young, as in the youngest person to ever sail solo across the Atlantic from west to east. At least we all think he is. He was 16 at the time and is now a veritable old man of the sea at the ripe old age of 18. He's in college now. Cal, welcome to the Carpe Diem podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Cal Courier. I'm a freshman at Cal Poly at San Luis Obispo. I'm studying philosophy. I've always lived in California my whole life. I have three brothers, a twin, two older brothers, and a dog. I really like hikes, backpacking, anything outdoorsy. And yeah.
Anything outdoorsy, like living on the ocean. So let me set the stage here a little bit. You and I were only introduced to each other this year by a mutual friend. Turns out we have a lot in common, not our age. I'm a bit older than you, probably older than your dad, but we both had an adventurous dream to sail across an ocean. My dream took me 15 years to fulfill. Yours probably just took a year or two. We both lived that out. So you did a west to east Atlantic crossing. Was it the summer of 2022?
Yep.
Which was the same summer I was crossing it with my daughter. I think you were a month or two behind us. Beyond those similarities, though, I think our paths to the ocean shore and our experiences crossing it differed quite a bit. So tell us what it is you did.
So I, as you said, sailed across the Atlantic. I think the thing that makes my sail more interesting than any of the hundreds of others of people who have done it was I did it alone when I was 16. I started in America around Cape Cod and went to Portugal, and I did it. I had only been sailing for maybe 4 months when I left. So the winter break before I left, I was just with my dad and my older brother in the car. We're driving, and we're trying to brainstorm. Oh, hey, what should I do this summer? And so I come up with this idea, sail across the Atlantic. But I don't really know how to sail. My dad had done some sailing when he was younger, and then my mom's father was a sailor his whole life. So I had resources available to me. When I say resources, I really mean knowledge available to me. And then I just started training for it. I started learning everything I could about sailing, and within 6 months, I was ready, and I did it alone. 28 days across the ocean, 3,500 miles. Landed in Portugal, stopped for one day in the Azores.
I love that. You're like, huh, what should I do next summer?
Yeah.
Most kids are probably like, well, I'll go get a job at McDonald's or I'll go take some summer school classes.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll go sail solo across the Atlantic.
I had some big ideas, and I wasn't always thinking this needs to be a solo adventure. I wanted to do it originally with my twin brother, who
Oh,
is
cool.
also great, and I think that would have been really fun. Now he didn't really want to do it. He had a job lined up and stuff like that, so I ended up doing it alone. But the original plan wasn't even to do it alone. Oh, another thing is I didn't even know this was going to be any sort of a world record. In fact, we're still not sure that it is. It's just no one else has spoken up.
Well, you know what? Whether it's a actual record or not, I guess doesn't really matter, but I would venture a guess there's very, very few 16-year-olds or 15 or 14 that have done that. 28 days alone at sea. What is that like? You know, I know what it's like because I've done it, but I don't know what it's like solo, which has to be completely different. But go ahead, paint a picture of a typical day in the listener's mind, like the sights, the sounds, the smells, like what were you doing during the day?
Absolutely. There's a book that I read before leaving, actually just a passage from a book, and it said it was when I was actually trying to decide if I was going to do this alone or not. And what it said is the worst part about sailing with other people is the people, and the worst part about sailing alone is being alone. And and
Okay.
it's absolutely right. When you're going to be in a small space for a month, you know, you're either going to be
Yeah.
really bored and very lonely, or you're going to be fed up to the teeth with whoever you're sailing with. And now, in my case,
Yeah.
I was extraordinarily bored and I was extraordinarily lonely. I was busy nonstop, 15 to 16 hours a day on schoolwork and this preparation. I was single minded, I was obsessed. And so I had not experienced boredom in 6 months. So when I'm the day before I leave and I think to myself, oh, maybe I'm going to get a little bored, so I should bring 5 books with me, right? So, whoa, genius, I was done with those 5 books in 3 days, right? And
Yeah.
so now I have another 25 days to stare at the wall. Luckily, my brothers had made a Spotify album for me of about 30 hours of songs, but I kind of stared at the wall and listened to music. So on these sailboats, there's a lot of, on the sailboat that I have and most solo sailboats, you have autopilots, which are wind vane
Yeah.
autopilots, so they just navigate off of the wind direction. And once you have one of those set up in the sails set and you know what the weather is going to be, there's really not much for you to do out there other than make sure everything is operating well. And so once I was done doing all that, it was either eating or trying to sleep or listening to music. And those were kind of my options. I didn't have much else. So the boredom really got to me. More than that, the loneliness. I'm actually going to tell a story here. So 3 days out, I was feeling great. I had to make the decision, should I turn back or should I go? I had never been alone out of sight of land ever in my life when I left on this trip. And so I was using the first 3 days as a trial run to see if it was a good idea or not. And
Right.
after
Okay.
after 3 days, I get out there and I kind of make the decision I'm going to keep going. And I call my dad, and this is the first time I'd called someone. And he calls me and he just says, "Hey, buddy, what's up? How are you doing?" And I was feeling fine, mind you. I just broke down sobbing. I could not
Yeah.
contain it. Hearing another human voice, and all I could choke out was just keep talking, Dad. And so he just talks at me, and my brothers come and they just talk at me, and I just listen and kind of cry. And then I didn't cry again for the rest of the trip. I just kind of moaned and groaned about how lonely I was.
You got over that hurdle and just kept on going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can attest to not the loneliness, but the lack of, I guess, activity that's required to sail. You're right. There was very little to do. The sails and the autopilot basically take care of it. So you have a lot of time on your hands. Technically, it's not that hard of a thing to do sailing across the Atlantic.
I'll add one more thing, which is that the sleep deprivation is also acute. It is very powerful, and I think that sleep deprivation was the one thing that made it possible for me to not go insane when alone for 28 days because my brain was so inactive. I could only sleep in 90-minute periods, and then I needed to wake up to make sure I was on course.
Hmm.
But my brain being exhausted, I think, really helped myself not go off the deep end. At the same time, it sucked, but it was just another part of it.
Yeah, we had 5 people on board, so at night we would do just 3-hour watches, and one person would get a night, every 5 days with no watch at all, and so we didn't have that sleep issue really. I can't imagine what it's like solo. It's got to be exhausting over the course of a month.
Yeah, no, it was exhausting. There was a point 8 days out when I just fell asleep for 8 hours and just went 50 miles off course, 50 miles north. And that was very funny because there's nothing to hit out there. And so my family was just watching my tracker, seeing me go north in this long loop, just kind of thinking to themselves, what, is he okay? Is he
Cal,
dead?
wake up,
Exactly.
Cal, wake up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and it's not funny in the sense as we pulled into the Azores, it was just after a big Atlantic storm. We had come across a boat 3 days out of the Azores that was shredded. His boom broke in the wind. His sails were shredded. His helm station was knocked out. And we asked him if he needed help. He goes, "No, I'll make it in on my stay sail to Horta, the Azores." And I said, "Great, we'll see you there." He came in about 3 days behind us, under tow by the Coast Guard because he had fallen asleep and run aground when he reached the Azores, and
No
that's
way.
not funny.
You know,
So
the only thing to hit in the Atlantic is the Azores. I think that's very funny.
yeah, how unlucky of him.
I have uncle of mine, and he said I would sail for a year on end as long as I never left the sight of land, which is a philosophy that I think lots of people have, where they want to be in sight of land. And I think that philosophy is just so fundamentally wrong. There's nothing to hit when you're in the middle of the ocean. There's no boats out there. There's no land out there. The waves are big, but if you know what the weather's going to be doing, which you should, because there's weather devices that you can have even in the middle of the Atlantic. So every day I would re-upload and re-see what the weather was going to be doing that day in the next couple days. So I was never afraid that I was going to get into a storm that I didn't know about. So if there's nothing to hit, you're safer out there really than anywhere
Yeah.
else. As long as you have a solid boat, you're safer out there than anywhere else. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that because the strangeness of not seeing land is powerful for a lot of people.
And I thought the most inspiring moments of our year at sea were those out in the blue water, open ocean. Like it's just so awesome how big that sea is and how small and yet large you feel at the same time when you're out in the middle of the ocean with nothing around you.
Yeah, I think that the sailing across the Atlantic is thought of to be something akin to climbing Everest or biking across America or some feat that requires expertise and training and it does, but it doesn't. It requires expertise in knowledge about your boat and knowledge about the resources you have available to you, like the AIS, so you know you aren't going to hit another boat, or
Yeah.
the for those who don't know, an AIS is a system that tracks every boat that's going to be offshore and will alert both parties if a collision is going to happen. And so you have weather trackers, you have AIS, you have new wind vane autopilots that have been designed recently. There are so many tools available to the sailor that will help you in this endeavor. As long as you know how to use those tools, you can do it. So
Yeah.
I'd been sailing for 4 months. I knew very little about sailing, but I knew a lot about my boat because I had lived on it for 3 months. That boat was I knew every piece on it. There's probably 3,000 at least moving pieces, and I knew every single one of them, and I was trained in every single one of them. And so the skill that helps in this particular adventure was knowledge of the boat rather than knowledge of sailing. And so a lot of people will think, "Oh, he's a good sailor," but that's not necessarily true.
That's a good point. I completely agree with you. That's well said. And if there's anybody listening who has a dream to do some sailing like that, some open water sailing, I would say go do it because if you're holding back thinking, well, I'm a new sailor, don't. It really, to Cal's point, it doesn't take that much. So, look, I'm trying to encourage people to do this, not scare them off. But I think it's fair to say with sailing, if you spend enough time at sea, inevitably you're going to have some scary moments. Same can be said about driving a car or anything that most of us do day to day. There can be scary moments. Most of them turn out just fine. We don't want to turn people off from sailing, but come on, tell us a scary moment.
Okay, so in terms of avoiding storms, I knew there was going to be a massive squall with 50 knot winds at the center going right where I was. So I went down one latitude. I went south to go across it, and so I had winds at my beam coming right across the bow the entire time, which was perfect. And they were great winds. They were maybe 13 to 15 knots, which was perfect. But because of those high winds up north, what that meant is I had maybe 20-foot swells. So I had huge waves, some of them white capping at the top. So I was in this for about 2 days. Terrifying to have just walls of water surrounding you. And the worst part is, I was in a school of Portuguese man of war jellyfish. So every time the bow of my boat would breach through one of those waves, there could be Portuguese man of war jellyfish coming on board. And there was a point where I was harnessed to the boat in no shoes, no shirt, just swim trunks, so I could fix something at my jib. I had to fix the roller furler of my jib, and a wave washes over the front and washes all onto me, hell of water. And there's maybe a Portuguese man of war jellyfish that washes 2 feet from my head, and if it had hit me, I would have probably been paralyzed momentarily, but that would have been long enough for me to slip off the side of the boat. And even though I was harnessed in, I would have just been crushed against the side of the boat repeatedly. And so that was definitely a scary moment. I definitely rethought how I was gonna go about fixing that piece in that location. But that was my scariest moment. Now, if I hadn't been looking at the weather, I would have probably been in a lot higher winds and a lot worse of a situation. But I was pretty lucky, all things told.
Wow, yeah, I never thought of that. We were definitely on a bigger boat than you. How big was your boat?
My boat was 30 feet, so barely any longer than the size of the swells.
Certainly doable for the Atlantic, but it's a pretty small boat. Ours was bigger and we had waves coming over the bow, but never probably to the extent that you did. We sailed through a mass of those Portuguese man o' wars. And when I say mass, there are probably 10 man o' wars per square meter. They were everywhere. Everywhere. It was
It's
amazing.
strange how many of them there are out there. It was
Yeah.
shocking to me. The first time I saw it, I thought it was trash.
I thought it was bubbles.
Yeah, you're given these images of a Portuguese man of war jellyfishes as long tentacles and big jellyfish looking thing. It genuinely looks like a floating bubble, as if you've taken a light purple doctor's glove, I don't know, latex glove, and
Yeah,
blown up a
right.
part of it.
Yeah,
They're very strange looking animals, but very cool
and everywhere.
everywhere.
So, if that was a scary moment, tell me a highlight. What was one of the best moments?
So I'm gonna say the best moment was not on the sale. Now, if you're asking for the best moment on the sale, it was probably eating this one meal. There was just cheesy mashed potatoes and chicken. And there was this one time when I ate it, and I just felt really good about eating it. Now, the problem was the trip was not very pleasant in general. Was what was pleasant about it was preparing for the trip and the bonding that happened between me and my father. To say anywhere that this is a solo adventure would be mistaken. This was definitely a group project done between me, my father, the man who we bought the boat from, who was an old sailmaker named Sandy Van Zant, and then my mom's father. And so all four of us working together made this happen. And so my best memories definitely come from that.
That is really cool. And
Yeah.
your best memories come from that because of,
Yeah, so here's what happened. So I am looking for a boat to buy. This one was not only one of the cheapest options, it was one of the best. Now the problem with it was a hyper modified boat. So this man, Sandy Van Zant, absolute heart of gold. He had been working on it. He'd owned it for the past 10 years and had been working on it so that he could sail solo to Bermuda in a race called the Bermuda 1-2, where you
mm,
sail solo to Bermuda and then you pick up someone and you sail double-handed back. Now, he's 90 years old, and so his wife tells him, "What do you mean you're going to go for your last hurrah? You're 90. Like you've hurrahed your last hurrah. You got to sell this boat." And so when he sells it to me, he isn't just selling the boat, he's selling his dream. And I think that was really important. And so he was very involved in the whole process. And without him, it wouldn't have been possible because, again, this boat was very specialized. We'd find little random pieces of metal bent in an odd shape, and we'd ask him, "What is this?" And he had a specific purpose for it. He said, "Oh, yeah, this is how you unscrew the gas cap," or whatever. And so without him, it would not have been possible. So learning about him and his whole story was a very enjoyable experience for me. The bonding that happened with my dad and then the bonding that happened with my grandfather. My grandfather didn't really think it was a good idea. He had been sailing his whole life and was very cautious, as a real sailor would be. He said, "This is not a good idea." With that said, you look like you're going to try it, and so because I'm going to use my sailing knowledge to help you, just so that I didn't get hurt. And so the bonding that happened between me and these much older and wiser men was just extraordinary. And I think I gained a lot from that, and it was a lot of fun.
that is precious, Cal. And I say that partly as a father who maybe experienced some of that with my own daughter as we were crossing the ocean. But that experience, when you said your highlight was not the sail itself, but the preparation, that is a theme that I've heard from several of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, where the actual event or whatever it is that the episode was about, it was actually their preparation for it that was their highlight. It's the journey, not the destination, that mattered to a lot of folks.
Definitely. I think solo adventures are seen of as very cool, and I think they are very cool, and I think that they should be done. But it's not a solo adventure as in I did it alone. It's as in I did that final piece alone. That final 10% push, yeah, that was me, but I mean 90% of it's the people around you and the support and the love and the bonding. And so that's what you hold on to. After I was done, I got some awards from some sailing associations, and they invited me out to New York, and I said I really am not going to go if I can't bring Sandy and my grandfather
Nice.
and just those people who were there with me, and so I think that it wasn't alone. It was never alone.
Sounds to me like for a 16-year-old, you matured a lot in that regard, learning from elders, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I think the energy and the type of attention to detail and the type of effort that a solo adventure will take, or any kind of breaking free adventure will take, will mature you in a lot of ways. Alex Honnold has a quote which I just love, and he says, "When's the last time you felt real fear?" You know? And why am I gonna be stressed out over a homework assignment? I've been attacked by orca whales. I've been in 20-foot swells. I've been alone for 28 days. I'm going to be fine. The homework assignment's going to be okay, right? That's why it's so important for people who are anywhere from 13 to 18. And 13 sounds young, but if it's the right 13-year-old man and you're a parent and you got that 13-year-old who's just chomping at the bit and wants to get out and wants to get out there, I mean, let them, I did kind of a TEDx talk. It was small. It was nothing, but what I say in it is that my trip was not an accomplishment of mine, it was accomplishment of my parents, because so many of my peers, when they heard about it, they said, "Oh man, I would love to do something like that, but my parents won't let me." And I think that that's a theme. And yes, these things take money. Yes, these things take time. But if you do them in the right way, it will take much less money and time than you think. Most people take about 6 years and $300,000 to prepare for a transatlantic or a solo transatlantic. I took 6 months and $20,000. And so is $20,000 a lot of money? Absolutely it is. But if you're taking something, a backpacking trip or a road trip or anything, and you budget it out and you do it with speed and efficiency, you can do it so much cheaper than you think.
That's good. That's good advice. Not that dropping 5 or 10 grand for a family trip to Disney World is a waste, but it is a really expensive way to spend a holiday, and you could spend the same amount of money with a completely different life-changing event, like what you did.
Yeah, my
So,
my old my older brother spent 5 days alone backpacking, and that was really casual. That was just a normal thing for my parents. And so I think that as much as I would love to be praised for this, I think it's really important to just say, "Hey, parents, let your kids live freely, and I mean, be cautious, of course, but take risks, you know?"
yeah. I know as I was growing up, my mother, when my sisters and I were kids canoeing to like Hudson Bay, and parents would ask her, "Aren't you worried about your children?" And she's like, no. What I worry about is when they're driving on the roads on a Friday night." And I think that's so true. We miscalibrate the real risks around us.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
There's something I see quite frequently, which is the conversation of zero risk, which I see in a lot of parents where they say, "Oh, yeah, no, that's cool. I see that there are monkey bars in that play structure over there. Did you know that this many children every year died from monkey bars? So I think those monkey bars should be taken then." And just the way of thinking like that, I think gets in the way of so much maturity and wisdom that so many children could have that come from being in risk situations, not even high risk situations, just any amount of risk situations. And so it's not about monkey bars, it's about just the philosophy of how to raise a kid.
yeah. And then they'll jump in a car and not put a seatbelt on. I've sailed 18,000 nautical miles in the past 3 years. I've had over 100
Wow.
overnight passages, a couple of Atlantic crossings. I just find something so captivating about being at sea. It's so addictive, but so calming. It's really hard for me to describe that feeling to other people. I am sure you know what that is like. Can you try describing that
I
feeling?
think you're talking to the wrong person here, unfortunately. So I did have some moments where I was captivated by the sea. There was three moments that I remember where I was just stunned by the beauty of it. The serenity, the nothingness, how there's just nothing there, and yet it feels like the world is so full at the same time. With that said, I think most of my trip I was either way too hot, way too cold, bored, lonely, or just kind of sad. So the beauty of the ocean might have been lost on my 16-year-old eyes as I did that trip.
Oh
Um,
no.
but with that said, there were definitely moments where I had an extraordinary appreciation for what I was seeing around me. There was a moment where my dad, I did not tell him I was going to do this before I did it, and when he found out I did it, he was very frustrated with me. Where I was in the last moments, I was maybe 5 days from Portugal. It was going to be the last moment I had doldrums before winds got higher, and so I took down my sails, tied myself to the boat, and jumped off with some washers in my pocket. And
Cool.
what I did is I sat there, I swam in the ocean as my boat kind of moved at half a knot, and I kind of swam after it. And I would drop a washer, and you could just
Cool.
see it spiraling down for minutes. You know, the ocean's miles deep, and it's just extraordinary to be above that much water and to think of the depths below you and to have nothing, just looking at your bare feet and miles of sea, and just the fear, the primal fear that grips you, and yet you're also not afraid at the same time because realistically, there's nothing that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, that is a weird feeling. It's you can't replicate that on land.
You can't anywhere.
You weren't really, well, you weren't a sailor before all of this. What on earth possessed you to pursue an Atlantic crossing?
So, of all the ideas that came up on that car ride at winter break with my brother and father, there was stuff like hiking the PCT or sailing across the Atlantic or learning multiple different coding languages, excuse me. And of all of those, the reason why I chose the Atlantic one was because I think it was something that a lot of people thought of as extremely difficult, but it wasn't. So I was lucky in the regard that I found this adventure that took me 6 months of hard work. Yeah, but it also kind of got me a world record, and I think that most world records are people think of as a little bit harder to get than that, you know? And so I figured out a way to dupe the system. Now, at the time, I had no idea it would be a world record. I just thought it would be something cool, you know? A little bit of dad lore, a little bit of, oh, I did something interesting when I was 16. And that was really it. I really don't have more of an answer than that, unfortunately. It was just kind of a impromptu. Maybe I should try this. And then I got hyper obsessed for some reason. I can't tell you what about the project made me so obsessed with it, but without that obsession, it never would have happened. And so I'm just grateful I found it.
What I hear you saying is this was almost a random, spontaneous idea in a way. I mean, yeah, it took 6 months of prep, but it wasn't like a lifelong dream. It was just like, hey, let's do something cool. And
Yeah,
that
exactly.
alone is, I think, a good enough reason for doing some things in life because I don't know, you call it spice in life, right? Just try something different.
Absolutely.
So, Cal, what advice do you have for someone who knows what they want to do, but they watch the days just slipping away without making the dream actually happen, without pushing it through to fruition?
So for me, I needed two things. I needed a deadline and I needed a partner. And that could be a group or just a partner. My partner, I would say, was my dad. In terms of the deadline, I know that June 27th was the last day I should probably leave before kind of the real squalls pick up. Realistically, it probably would have been fine, but you need that deadline to compress your time because your task will always expand to fill your time. So you need a deadline. You need a deadline so that you can't possibly leave after this date. And so I'm going to leave on that date and I'm going to do it. And then the other thing you need is a partner or a group. And so you tell them, hey guys, we're doing this. And then they will support you and you will support them. And so anytime I would wake up in the morning, I would go to school. The moment I got back from school, the moment I walked through that door, I would walk over to my dad's office and say, Dad, how's it going? Let's sit down and talk. You know, during math class, I got distracted and I watched this video on how to repair this part of the jib. And he said, oh, that's super interesting. Let's note that down. And then he said, okay, I watched this video on the licensing. Then we'd just talk about it and we'd get that discussion going and we'd just riff on each other for hours and we'd send each other videos. And just having that partner got me so much more motivated because he was clearly excited about it and I was clearly excited about it. So we built on each other.
Well, you said you didn't really enjoy the crossing itself, but you loved the preparation leading up to it. You sound like you're thrilled after the fact to have done it. So let me ask the question. If you were to do it all over again, would you still do it knowing what you know now?
Absolutely. I think it was a fantastical. I mean, of course, I would have done things differently. I would have downloaded some TV shows, maybe, would have brought some more books, more music, more entertainment for sure. But I would have done it because the impact it's had on my life, the amount of self-confidence I've gained from having followed through on a project is just extraordinary. The skills I learned on not even how to sail, on how to spreadsheet and organize tasks and time manage. So I think it was 100% the right call.
What did you learn about yourself?
So so a lot of people ask this question. A lot of people assume that when you're alone for 28 days, you're going to have some really big awakening kind of moment. But I can't say that I had a big one. One funny thing that happened was I think we all have different voices in our heads that tend to say different things. So you have a negative voice, you have a positive voice, you have a voice that's worried about what people think of you, whatever. And I, by sitting with myself for a long time and now able to distinguish these voices from one another, and so I know if, I'm being talked to by just a negative voice, and I can just say, you know what, that's just being a negative voice. I can quiet that out, right? And so it's given me a little bit more mental self-control.
Yeah, that's well said. A little more mental control, mental discipline. Like you, I never had any big revelations while spending my night watches looking up at the stars with a black void around me. There were no big aha moments.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a vision of what being alone at sea would look like. Big storms, shirtless in rags, yelling at Poseidon and calling his wrath upon you. But I mean, it's not the Odyssey. It's not Life of Pi. I was just kind of bored and alone. So when I go out onto the back deck to check the machines and the stuff that's going on, making sure everything's right, I'm thinking more to myself, golly gee, this is cold, not wow, the meaning of life is really that we need people to help us along our journey. So you're not you're not thinking about philosophy. You're thinking about maybe this hot chocolate would be better with marshmallows. You're still a human. You're still having the same human thoughts you did back on land. You just don't have anyone to voice them to.
Well said. Look, that was an amazing adventure, Cal, sailing solo across the Atlantic. Just pulling it off, even before you set sail, is a big accomplishment. But then making it the month across those waters is a second big accomplishment. Admittedly, that's out of reach for a lot of people, either the time or the money. What's your advice to someone who wants to maybe replicate some of the really awesome aspects of your adventure, of how you grew, what you experienced, but in maybe a more accessible way?
So, in terms of sailing specifically, the hardest part about sailing is there is an undeniable monetary requirement. With that said, you don't need to invest that much money into the perfect equipment and the perfect gear if you just have, I mean, some spit, grit, and good luck?
That's really helpful, Cal. Thank you. You have such a contagiously enthusiastic itch for adventure. What would you say to help coax someone who has a little itch for adventure to just go for it? It doesn't have to be sailing the Atlantic, but just go figure out the idea and just go do it.
I think your life is determined by the things you've done. And so if you consider yourself an adventurous person, but you don't go on adventures, you're not an adventurous person. You're someone who wants to be an adventurous person, and that's admirable in and of itself. But if you really want to claim that, then you need to get out there and you need to find a way to make it happen because it doesn't just happen. Thought needs to go into it and time and energy. So if you find yourself sitting on the couch and watching reels, just notice that that's not who you want to be, and do everything in your power to become that person. And that sounds super cheesy, that sounds cliche, but it's really true. If you have these ideas in your head of who you are, of an adventurous person, but you aren't backing that up with action, you know, you need to think about that.
Thank you for that perspective. Before we close, Cal, out of curiosity, what's the next adventure you have planned for yourself?
I think that college in and of itself is an adventure, and I think it should be taken as such. I'm going to be going to Burning Man, Big Sur, wherever, but I think that the next 4 years I want to buckle down and just take care of college.
Okay, Cal, thank you so much for today. I wish you the best in your years ahead. Thank you for your time.
Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Carpe Diem Live Your Dream podcast. If you like the show, there's nothing more valuable to me than you following it and sharing it with others. I drop a new episode every Friday, so tune in again for another great adventure story. And check out the accompanying website, www.gocarpediemnow.com, and then go seize the day and live your dream.